Hey everybody, welcome back to Stream of Consciousness with Dan. Some conversations ask you to slow down before they even begin. They ask you to set aside assumptions, step away from the noise, and make room for the complicated parts of being human. Today we are going to have one of those conversations. Today's guest was a part of an event that most of us only witnessed from a distance, an event that caused real harm and left deep marks on our country. But this episode isn't about politics or headlines. It's about the inner story, the confusion, the vulnerability, the choices that led him there, and the long, uncomfortable work of facing those consequences. What you'll hear today is not an attempt to justify anything. It's not an attempt to rewrite the past. It's a person trying to understand how he lost his way, what accountability has required of him, and how he's trying to rebuild a life with honesty and humility. My hope is that you listen with the same posture I brought into this conversation, not to excuse, not to condemn, but to understand. Because if we're honest, most of us have had moments where we drifted, where we were searching for belonging, and where we made choices we wish we could take back. But this is a story about what happens after. All right, everyone, we are live with Stream of Consciousness with Dan. Today, I'm joined by Daniel Gray. Over the past few years, Daniel has been walking through a season of deep reflection and accountability, a season that reshaped his life in ways he never expected. During his time in prison, he wrote a handwritten memoir titled The Men from the Medium, a collection of raw thoughts and personal wrestling that became part of his journey toward clarity and responsibility. His memoir is about turning pain into purpose, finding the meaning in the middle of chaos, and rebuilding a life with honesty and humility. That's the posture he brings into this conversation. Daniel, thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
Dan, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super pumped to talk to you. So, before we get too deep, I just kind of want to see or have you paint the picture of what your early childhood looked like, where you grew up, what you were interested in, your hobbies, things like that. Just talk about what kind of young Daniel looked like.
So I was actually born in Blackpool, England. I'm actually still a British citizen. I have a duality of citizenship.
Oh, wow. I did
Yeah,
not
my
know
father's
that.
from
Interesting.
very surprising, I know, but my father's from McAllen, Texas. My mom is British. My grandma and my grandfather, they were in the precious minerals mining industry. He lived in South Africa, North Africa, eventually retiring in Australia. My older brother lives in Holland. I have a lot of family all throughout Europe. I came to America when I was 7 years old. I had a sister; she was born special needs, and we left England to come to America in search of a better healthcare situation for her. So at 7, 8 years old, I moved from Birmingham, England, to Irving, Texas, which is right outside of Dallas.
Okay, yeah.
At some point, my sister she passed away when I was very young, and so my family
Oh,
separated. Yeah, and my I ended up moving in with my father. My father was a he's a software engineer, so we did a lot of traveling. So every year I was, I'd go from like Irving to Dallas to Atlanta, then to Florida,
mhm.
and I ended up residing in Jacksonville, Florida. I've been here on and off for since about 1996. I went back to England in '97. I did my A levels over there, so I have a degree in business studies and psychology from England. I came back to America again, and I kind of started working in the bars. I started working as a doorman, then I became a bartender. At around 25 years old, I got involved in martial arts. I had my first amateur fight when I was 25, 26 years old. I turned professional at 30, and I had a really, really tough pro debut. I got beat up, and I met this
Yeah.
guy, and he was living in Asia, and he convinced me to move to Taiwan. So I ended up right around 2010. I moved to Taiwan for 3 years, and I worked as a martial arts instructor slash English teacher, kindergarten teacher in Taiwan. I was married at the time too. I had a very long marriage, about 10-year marriage. Came back to America again, and so once I came back to America, I stopped sort of like coaching and fighting. I started doing program direction and running businesses and so forth. I moved to Atlanta, Georgia from Jacksonville. And I think it was around the time of the first Trump presidency or election. So I
Mhm.
moved there right around that time. And I was living in Atlanta for probably 3 years, 3, 4 years. And I had a really, really tough situation. I had a really, really hard divorce that I went through that led to just a complete downward spiral in my life. I literally just after my marriage ended, I literally loaded up my car and I drove from Jacksonville through Atlanta all the way to Las Vegas. I moved into a studio apartment in Las Vegas. I started working on the Las Vegas Strip, and I got myself involved in drugs and alcohol like I really shouldn't have. I had a really really tough overdose on fentanyl where I woke up in the back of an ambulance. It happened right on the Las Vegas Strip. Started getting my life back together again. COVID happened. I moved into my dad's house in outside of Austin, Texas during COVID. And then I ended up moving back to Atlanta. I took a job again in Atlanta once the world opened back up and I could find work. And that's when we had, the COVID sort of dovetailed into the 2020 election. And I guess I can just keep going with this whole part, but I got really involved in sort of the radicalized conspiracy, deep conservative stuff that was going on. Back then, it was like it's still the same thing. It was all Jeffrey Epstein and
Mhm.
Epstein Island, and there's a shadow government. But now it's whichever political party's in power is going to be the one that bears the responsibility for that, I guess. And the election comes up, and it was just all these mail-in ballots. The president is talking about that. I'm living outside of Fulton County, which was a big county during the 2020 election. All these mail-in ballots show up. I'm sleeping on the floor in my friend's house. I'm just doom
Yeah.
scrolling every day, and I really get myself into like this shadow government, the QAnon conspiracy world. I ate it hook, line, and sinker. I think COVID had a lot to do with that. Plus, I had a very like sort of a broken place. I think I was searching for an identity. I ended up,
Mhm.
going to January 6th. And I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. At the time, I didn't know that it was going to be such a pivotal, huge moment.
Right.
But I ended up getting involved in the protest, and there was a situation where my phone got stolen from a police officer. That was the catalyst for me to get more involved. I did get more involved. I made some big mistakes that day, and about I ended up leaving, and I didn't even realize how big the situation I got myself into was. I got on social media, I was bragging about it. Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
did this, that, and the other. And the next thing you know, I realized this is the biggest news story in America. Oh my goodness, I'm probably in a lot of trouble. So I go on the run from the FBI, and I ended up in
Ouch.
Jacksonville, Florida. I'm sleeping on the floor of a friend's. It's a construction company. He had like an office that I was sleeping on the floor in. And like January, February, March, I'm still a free man, so I assume that there's nothing going on. So I get a job, and I move in with a friend, and I'm driving to the beach one day, and the next thing you know, I get pulled over by like 18 FBI agents at gunpoint. They beckon me out
Why?
and they lay me down. Yeah, that was a wild, wild thing. At the time, I didn't think it was me getting pulled over. I thought it was the car behind me. I thought it was mistaken identity. Just I hear all these, put your hands out the vehicle, come out, walk backwards
Yeah.
towards the sound of my voice, lay on the ground. So I do what I'm told. I'm actually really calm for some strange reason, and I just think, oh man, these guys have got the wrong guy. They handcuffed me, they picked me up, and I look around and I see all these FBI agents, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I knew exactly what it was at that point. And so the FBI, they take me to Duval County. I spend the night in Duval County. I don't know what's going on. I haven't seen the news or anything. I go in front of the federal judge the next day, and they read my charges out. And I find out I'm facing 37 and a half years in prison. I'm like, oh my goodness. And then
Oh,
the
that's what it
crazy part
started
was,
at?
yeah, it started at
It's
37 and a half years. That was that was what I faced for the entirety of my indictment. I faced almost a life sentence. And so yeah, the weird thing was I go in front of the judge and they tell me I have a $20,000 bond. So I'm like, how can I raise this money? And they're like, no, you just have to sign a piece of paper that says that you won't run, and if you do run, we can take
oh,
twenty five
right.
thousand
Yeah.
dollars from you. It's a signature bond. So I'm like, you guys are letting me go. They're like, yeah, we're letting you go. And the FBI hands me a bag of Burger King. Like, here's some Burger King, and they give me a pat on the back. And I walk outside, and there's all this news media everywhere. Mr. Gray, Mr. Gray. And I go to a bar. I get a friend of mine to pick me up. I don't have my phone. The FBI's taking my phone, so I have nothing. And I find out that I'm the biggest news story in Jacksonville. And there's CNN, ABC, like all the major networks have picked it up. And I get fired on television. Like I'm I'm watching TV and I'm like wondering if I should go to work the next day. And they
Yeah.
go, we reached out to his job and he's no longer employed there. That was kind of, I guess that's the long story short to the period where I was actually under indictment.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, I didn't realize it started
Yeah.
out as 37 and a half years because, yeah, that would have been, whew. So no, I also kind of just wanted to backtrack because I'm a huge UFC fan. So I
Okay.
just wanted to kind of talk about your MMA experience because, uh, I don't know, my favorite fighter is actually Corey Sandhagen. You know who that is?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm
Just
familiar. Yeah.
because he just can get the absolute crap beaten out of him, but he just has like that
Hmm.
will and a way. Like he's not hugely built, like he's not the most technical fighter in the world, but he just has that will and a way. So do you think that kind of shaped you as a person having that MMA background?
Oh, I mean, yeah, it was huge. I was raised in a situation where, I didn't have a whole lot of guidance growing up. I wasn't really cultivated into a man. My father was kind of off doing the things he was doing when I was raised. I come from like a separated family, and so I chose to get into martial arts. I started working as a bouncer first at a nightclub, and then I realized that I just didn't know how to fight. And I'm not a particularly big guy. I'm maybe 5'9". I walk around, 190 to 210 somewhere in there. So I'm not like a enormous man. And so I walked into a place called Royal Martial Arts in Jacksonville, Florida, around 2005. And I met a really cool guy. His name's Roberto. He's been one of my best friends forever. He's a black belt now. He runs multiple Gracie Bajas. He's just an awesome, awesome, like sort of mentor and friend to me. But he took me under his wing and he really sort of showed me like, how to really stand up for yourself and how to sort of cultivate like, some strong characteristics. And so I had my amateur debut and I was, 25, 26, something like that. So I came in a little bit late and I did okay as an amateur, but as a pro, I was a terrible fighter. I mean, my pro debut was against a guy named Will Chope. He ended up fighting Max Holloway. He's actually pretty well known. He's a good friend of mine. But I fought him when he was like 18, and that was his first professional win. Go for me, go me. We had a really good fight, and it went 3 rounds, and he beat me like 70 times in the face. It was in the hometown, and I was supposed to win that fight, but he was just tough, and he went on. He has like almost 200 fights now. I think he's pretty well known. He fights all over Asia. But
Well,
after that
what
fight,
was his, sorry, what was his last name? I was just gonna look him up.
Chope. Yeah, one of my. I consider him
Oh,
a lifelong
gotcha.
friend.
Okay.
Yeah, he's 6'4". He's like a huge guy, man. It's funny because like I have a ton of respect for him just as a friend and as a fighter as well. He's a really great guy. But I'm in there in the second round. I win the first round kind of just barely. I end up on top, and then the second round he comes out and he's like starts kneeing me, drops me, and then like I remember at one point he had his head in my chin, just growling, and I was like, oh my goodness, this guy's terrifying. But he's the guy that convinced me to go to Asia, and so I moved to Taiwan. We fought on the same card in Taiwan a couple of times too. So
Well, that's sweet. Like I said, I think it really kind of, like you said, you kind of grew up a little broken, so it gave you a lot of, I would imagine, discipline. Like I couldn't punch someone
mm-hmm.
if I even could try. Like I don't even know how to
Mm,
punch someone, but it obviously gave you a lot of discipline and just kind of a regiment and just kind of to
hmm
um just have a sense of, maybe, I mean, obviously you're not Max Holloway or
no.
uh anything like that, but just a sense of wow, I'm pretty good at this, and like
Yeah.
I can do something. So, well, that's awesome. I always like to talk a little UFC because I think you guys are just absolutely nuts in the best way possible.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so getting back, so you are in Jacksonville, you've been arrested, you've eaten your Burger
Mhm.
King. What was the
Actually gaining the weight of
next?
a homeless guy.
Oh, you did.
Yeah.
So what was kind of the next steps? And I actually, before we even get into that, when the judge said, 37 and a half years, what was going through your mind? So like for me, I would be like your chest would sink, your brain gets fuzzy, like, is this real? Like just what was going through your head when the judge said that?
I actually started laughing. I literally started laughing in court. I was like, there's no way this is that serious, because I didn't understand the magnitude of what was happening or what was trying to be done with the whole. For me, it was just a situation. Like I never. The truth is, I never intended to stop the election of Joe Biden. I went there as a protester. I had my phone stolen, and I got involved in a crowd, which was stupid of me to do. But there was no, like, my involvement in January 6th was about 25 minutes after they stopped the certification of the election. I didn't even arrive at the Capitol until right around the time that they ended that whole thing.
Oh,
I'm not
okay.
excusing my I'm not excusing myself, but it's just you have to
Hmm.
understand that I didn't really understand the magnitude of what was going on. I didn't even understand
Right.
what I was being accused of. I just knew that it
Hmm.
was I was involved in a political event that had become a big media story. And so when they read 37 and a half years out, I'm like, based upon what? And so to break that down, I faced what's called the 1512 obstruction charge, which is they levied it against about 400 protesters. The Supreme Court eventually overturned that when I was in prison, but it was the first time it had ever been used in the context of protesting. It was a post Enron like law that had to do with document destruction that the prosecution had kind of shaped into something they could use against us. So what should have been maybe like a 5 or 6 year, they could elevate it because that carried a 20-year maximum with it. And so that was one of the ways they call it charge stacking. So they put a huge charge on top. You're guilty of the bottom charges, but we have this big charge on top as well.
Oh,
And so but I wasn't aware of any of this. I'd never been in the legal process before. And so I honestly thought it was absurd. I was like, there's no real way. And then you have to imagine, the FBI was super nice to me. Hey man, you've been fooled. We were talking about fights. Then they send me home and they give me a bag of Burger King. So I'm like, there's no way this is real because if I'm
hmm,
facing 37 and a half years, how am I walking out of prison right now? I should be, thrown underneath the building or something. But I didn't understand how the legal process worked. So it took me probably 2 to 3 years to really wrestle with the idea that I was facing some serious time. And a lot of that was kind of born into, there was a lot of conspiracy stuff that I was still reading. A lot of these, like, deep conservative sites that kind of, they're not really news. They kind of, put together these weird associations.
hmm.
And all of a sudden I'm front and center in all this and I'm facing a lot of time. And I have a lot of people telling me, hey, this isn't real. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes and so on and so forth. And so I think confusion was probably the best explanation for my mindset at that time.
So, when were you actually formally sentenced to your eventual or eventual time, which I think was 36 or 30 months?
Yeah. So it was a long process. I had a charge that was like it was kind of true, but kind of not true. I did grab an officer's baton, but I was not somebody who physically pushed an officer down the flight of stairs, and that's what I was accused of. And so what
Hmm.
the prosecution had done is they put a picture of me with my hands up like this when I was, blocking the baton. And they put a picture of an officer down a flight of stairs like 14 seconds later, and they pinned them side by side, and they wanted me to take responsibility for that. And I was not going to plead guilty to that. I'm like, look, I'll plead guilty to anything else. I literally said, if you take the word shoved out of this statement of offense, I'll plead guilty to it right now. They just wouldn't do it. And so I had like 4 or 5 videos that they'd given us, and all the other evidence, it was put into evidence.com. And people who follow it, they understand there's like 44,000 hours of video footage inside the Capitol that we were never allowed to see. And so I just kind of hung on to like hope and a prayer because the body worn camera was kind of inconclusive, but it did show that the officer was still standing after I put my hand up and blocked the baton. So, but it was kind of like my word against theirs at this point. So I held on for 3 years. I just kept delaying. I fired my attorneys. I took on a different attorney. I ended up firing that attorney about a month before we went to trial. But what I was really doing was I was doing my very, very best to buy myself time because as every other case went to trial, the video evidence from that case would become public. And so that was the only way that I was actually getting video evidence outside of the videos that
Hmm.
I'd been given. And so by the absolute grace of God, I woke up at like 7 a.m. It was the weirdest thing. And I went straight to Twitter. And I'd just been on Twitter every day because as cases went out, videos came out, and I was just like scanning these things. And I found a video, man. And I found a video. It was a bird's eye view of the incident. And it showed exactly what I was saying, that yes, I was responsible for grabbing this officer's baton, but the fall happened 14 seconds later. It was because their helmet was in their face. They were completely away from me. I had nothing to do with the actual fall portion. And so that gave me enough leeway. I fired him. I had a major attorney take my case. I ended up firing him because he was just taking my case off into a conspiracy direction. I went back to my public defender. I had this fantastic public defender. And from the beginning, we had this relationship of, look, I want to plead guilty, but there's this one aspect of this charge I can't plead guilty to.
Right.
And so she was cool. She's a DC public defender, and everybody said, don't trust the DC public defender. But this lady, over the course of 3 years, we actually kind of became friends, and she kind of, really endeared herself to me. And I began to trust her. And so I sent her this video. I'm like, I finally found a video. Look at this video. She sent it back to the prosecution. The prosecution, they were willing to reconsider the statement of offense. And so we fought them on that statement of offense. They changed it 4 times until I finally got the wording that said, this incident happened at this time, and then this fall happened at this time. And I pled guilty to the exact same paperwork. I pled guilty to the 37 and a half years. I signed the obstruction. I signed for the assault charge. But what I had done was I created enough leeway in between what they'd said happened and what I said happened that we got to go into sentencing and argue about who was actually responsible for this fall. So the entire my entire case had hinged upon this one thing. It was me saying, yes, Your Honor, I shouldn't have got involved in this. Yes, Your Honor, this was a big mistake for me. I've changed my life. I want to do something different. But this one sentence has kept me from pleading guilty to it. And so the prosecution asked for 6 years. I mean, they asked for the absolute maximum. They wanted a
Yeah.
body injury enhancement. They couldn't provide medical records. They couldn't do anything, but it was all based upon word of mouth. And I was facing a senior federal judge. Her name's the Honorable Judge Amy Berman Jackson. If you were to Google her, you'd be like, this woman is she's going to crucify Daniel because
Yeah.
she's kind of known as like an anti-Trump judge. But
Oh, gotcha.
she,
Yeah.
she took, yeah, but she took my side. Like I presented all this evidence to her. And I presented the videos, and we did a 36 picture markup about exactly what had happened with that. And ultimately, the prosecution asked for 6 years. She gave me 30 months. And so, and then she ended up giving me a bunch of praise after because I was honest. I was like, look, I had drug and alcohol
Hmm.
problems. I got myself in a conspiracy. I don't want to be here. This is terrible. What have I done to myself? And she ended up saying, Daniel, I think you're going to have a life after this, and I want that for you. So yeah, but I guess to answer your question, that was about a year and a half ago when I finally got to the place where I could plead. It was about 10 months before, maybe 12 months before the next election. So I got myself close to the next election. I know Trump was talking about pardons. I got enough leeway in my sentencing that it was going to be a manageable time in prison. I wasn't going to do a lot of time, and I also didn't have to plead guilty, admit to like actually intentionally harming an
Right.
officer. So we
Yep.
fought hard. I mean, we fought really hard. It was a big win, even though if you look at it, if you Google it, it doesn't look like a win. That's about as good of a win you'll ever get in a Fed case.
Yeah. So do you feel like the American justice system, and I think I might know the answer to this based on what you've said,
Mm-hmm.
but do you feel like the American justice system, served you appropriately?
I think so. For me, I think so. And I have to be careful when I say that because I'm not speaking for all defendants. The
Hmm.
approach that I took was I ended up really understanding how the federal justice system works. And the first thing you have to understand is they have a 98% conviction. I mean, it's over. Once you are indicted, you will be going to prison for something if there's prison time on the table. And the average prison sentence in a federal case is 120 months for 10 years. So you have to know what you're dealing with here.
Hmm.
When you end up with a federal indictment, yeah, it's going to get bad for you. So there's a lot of things about a federal indictment people need to understand. It's called the acceptance of responsibility. And this will force people into plea agreements. It's a 3-point swing if you accept responsibility for your actions in court. You say, I'm sorry, I made some mistakes and so forth. Your sentence becomes exponentially smaller. But if you go into court and you try to defend yourself, you're going to end up tripling your sentence. And that's a brute fact of how sentencing works. So what I did was I had a robust understanding of the situation I was in. I was like, oh, okay, I'm facing a federal indictment in DC with a DC jury or a left leaning judge in a
Yeah.
January 6th case. I don't have a shot here. I mean, they have a
Hmm.
100% conviction rate with January 6th cases. They're giving out 22 years to some of these guys, and so how do I navigate this? And so my public defender was fantastic. She's like, look, this is how the game is actually played. This is not about fairness. It's not about what's right. This is about how long do you want to spend in prison. And so I think for my actions, for my involvement, 30 months is about as light as they got. I mean, I think I had probably one of the best outcomes of any January 6th case with my charges. So I can't complain. I really can't complain too much.
All right, so let's move on to you're in prison, and
Okay.
I'm not going to ask you the generic question, how was prison? Because yeah, it probably sucked. It was probably not that fun, but
Well,
was there
it
a
actually wasn't
point?
bad. It actually wasn't too
What?
bad. I'll be honest. Yeah.
Well, where were you at? Where were you incarcerated
I
at?
was in Jessup. I was in Jessup, Georgia, at the federal satellite low. So another thing my judge had done is she'd set me up in a position where like I had a zero chance of recidivism. Like I wasn't a threat, and so I got to go to like a satellite low, which is it's like a coveted prison. It's like has a weight pile. It has pool tables. It has ping pong tables. The food is actually not terrible. You can move around freely. You're in a dorm. So when people talk about prison experiences, I had about as good as you can possibly have it. There was a library
Mhm.
to go to, there was a church I would go to, and stuff like that too. So outside of the monotony and the absolute boredom of it, prison was not a bad experience, especially because on the outside I had so much uncertainty and I was always on social media
Mhm.
and freaking out. But going to prison was kind of like being set free a little bit.
Well, that's good to hear, and I think, like you said, you handled everything the best way. You weren't violent, you weren't, you're just kind of speaking your mind, and I mean, that's kind of what being an American is about. So you really didn't do anything terribly wrong, in my opinion. But, um, but where was the point where you started to be like, I want to write my memoir? Was there a specific spark, or when were you like, I want to start, writing my memoir?
So, I trust in the Lord in a lot of things. And like right before I was on social media, like kind of guiding my friends through what was going on with my case and everything and explaining where I was going. And I had like 20 people in a row say, you need to write a book, write a book, write a book, write a book. And I literally put a video out where I was like, fine, I'll write an effing book. I was like, leave me alone. And so I went into prison with the idea of I'm going to write a book. And so I was, I dropped out of high school in like eighth or ninth grade. I mean, I got a GED, then I went to England, I did my education. So I didn't do, haven't done a whole lot of writing in my life. But when I was young, I was like very well read. My parents, they had me reading C.S. Lewis at a young age. And so, when I got to prison about 3 months in, I sat down and I had a pen and paper. I didn't know where to begin. I met a guy in prison who wrote a book as well, and he showed me how to begin. So I began with the plea agreement portion, and I just started writing that down. And it took me about probably about 5 months, honestly, just sitting in there, and I wrote everything down. And I got it all the way up until Trump got elected. And what I was doing was I was literally writing things as they were happening. So I'd have a day where, like, let's say, for example, the Trump assassination attempt happened.
Hmm.
So I literally ran back to my bunk and I just wrote it down word for verbatim what happened. Not like on TV, but like sitting in my bunk, I'm listening to my
Right.
radio. I hear the gunshots go off. I run outside. These are the people that were happy about it. These are the people who were upset about it. This is what the conclusion was when I laid down in bed again. So and remember how tough that election was. I mean, it was just so back and forth, so divisive. And
Hmm.
I'm getting all of my news through either CNN or Fox News because that's all you get in
Right.
prison. So
Oh,
I
so
felt like I
you're
was in.
like, you can't win because it's like CNN's going to tell you what they think and Fox is going to tell you what they think, and it's just like,
Yeah,
just tell me the real facts.
just what is going on out there. And honestly, it was probably the grace of God because if I had access to a phone or something like that, I would have been on Twitter every 15 seconds trying to see what was happening. And so, then the election happens. I have the book; it's about this tall, and it's not completed yet. And a big part of the book, I was in a relationship with a woman. She was very like a left leaning woman. She stood by my side the whole time. So she was very important to me. And so I'm
Hmm.
writing this book and I'm just giving her all this praise for standing by my side. She helped me out when I was homeless. She wrote a letter to the judge. She was just great. And right when Trump says that we're getting pardoned, she just dumps me. And so like the house that I was going to go back to, the money that I'd set aside, everything was gone. And I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness. And now I've got to deal with this election thing. And the question after the election was, are they going to pardon the January 6th defendants? And Trump comes out and he says, I'm going to pardon these guys. And then I get dumped on my ex-girlfriend. So like now I don't have a place to go. My dad's turned his back on me, so I don't have any support from my family. So I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to be homeless, if I get pardoned. And then the whole thing, the inauguration happens, and we're not exactly sure, who's going to get pardoned or if it's going to happen at all. We're watching the TV. I'm in the pavilion. I'm with one of the Proud Boy guys. I was watching this with the Proud Boys. And I'm standing next to him, and we're watching this TV. And Trump comes out, and he's like, "January 6th hostages, you guys are going home tonight." And I'm like, I look over, like, what are you talking about? And then my case manager comes in, and she brings in this paperwork. She's like, "Daniel, I have a pardon from the president. You're going home tonight." And I just start crying. I'm like, "Oh my goodness." And so, like, but then they're like, "Well, actually, Daniel, we don't know because you have an officer assault charge, so we don't know if they're actually going to pardon you. So just go back to your bunk." And I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. And then 3 hours later, a guy walks in with a flashlight. He's like, hey, you're Daniel Bray, get out of here. And within about 45 minutes, I'm riding with one of my buddies who I was locked up with. I'm riding with him back to go sleep on a friend's couch. And so I have the book, but two-thirds, I have it all the way up until there. But I didn't get a chance to finish it because, I'm writing this book about this woman, and I'm like writing it with this expectation of coming home to her, and then she dumps
Hmm.
me. So like it kind of pulled the rug out from under the book. I'm like, well, what do I do with it? And so I sat on it for like 3 months. I got my life together. I started working. And then one day I was like, I am going to finish this stupid book. And I finished it. And I finished it in a way that I didn't try to tear her down. I didn't make an enemy out of her. And I finally got the book completed. And then I had to talk to text the book into my phone because I didn't have internet. So I'm like literally
Oh, so
talking. This is a hugely oh goodness, like it was an emotional book. So I'm like talking it into my phone and I'm like breaking down, like, oh my, and I finally get it. Like with all these horrible spelling mistakes and all this, talk to text errors, I get it onto a Word document. I sent it to a friend. I'm like, dude, tell me what you think about my book. And this is like a guy who writes too. He's a very, very successful guy. He's not going to BS me. And I expected him to come back with a bunch of critiques, but he came back and he said, Daniel, this is about as close to a finished product as you could possibly have.
Oh,
And I'm like, what
wow.
do you mean? He goes, this book is basically ready to be published. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I wrote it in one shot. I never even went back and revised it. But
Hmm.
it made sense because it's a memoir about what was happening. So it's kind of like it's more like a wartime journal than it is
Oh,
like a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
cultivated story. You know what I mean? It's just a play by
Hmm.
play about what happened. And a lot of the emotional things. It was very, very raw and taxing and stuff. And so that got me motivated. I got internet. I put it into AutoCrit. AutoCrit rated it really, really high. A lot of the AI software that looked at it said, this is actually a pretty good book you've written. I sent it out a few times. And that's kind of where I'm at now. So I've got to finish work. I'm waiting for it to come back from a copy editor just so the punctuation is good because that's not my world. And
Hmm.
once I have that, I've talked to a couple of publishers. Some people are interested. Some people don't want to deal with the January 6th offended. I might just
Right.
publish it myself. But the work is done, and I'm proud of that. And that was a painstaking thing to do, and I didn't expect myself to be able to do it. But somehow I wrote a book. There you go.
It's awesome because that's kind of what my podcast is. Like I'm not doing it. I mean, I am doing it for the community and things like that, but it makes me fulfilled to talk to people,
Mm-hmm.
like you and my other guests, just like kind of, I know it was very hard for you to probably write about all of that. I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's just, it just really resonates with me that you just put yourself out there, you're vulnerable, you
Mm-hmm.
just be honest. And no,
Yep.
I love that. So, yeah, once that comes out, I cannot wait to probably
Thank
purchase
you.
the first copy.
Thank you
And
very much. I appreciate you saying that.
well, I thought I saw something on your Podmatch profile. It looked like almost a, does it have a cover already?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it does have a cover to it, and the cover is a picture of a goose. And
Oh yeah, the
people
goose
always
with the
ask me, like,
ball and chain.
yeah. So there's a story behind that. It was I was in the prison I was in was mostly outside. It was a dorm with a big outside area, and you'd have these geese that would fly in all the time. And so we'd feed the geese every day. We'd just sneak right out of the cafeteria and feed the geese every day. And I thought to myself, I'm like, well, these geese are flying into prison every day, and then they're leaving. So obviously they don't know that they're in prison. So why should I assume that I'm in prison? And so what I did was,
Oh.
it's on my forearm here, but I got a tattoo I had a guy. I don't know if you can see it there, but it's a prison tattoo. But I paid a guy $60 for the commissary to tattoo a goose with a ball and chain on my forearm. And I didn't think much of it. And then when I started doing the book, I was like, let me see if I can turn this into a cover. And that's the cover I came up with. I love it. That's what I'm going with. So that's the story behind the goose.
No, that's freaking cool. I love that. Oh my gosh, that is really neat. Oh, pardon the interruption, folks. But before we jump back in, I want to take a moment to spotlight something I'm genuinely excited about. Daniel Gray has a new book coming out, a memoir called The Men from the Medium, a project that carries the same honesty, grit, and heart he brought to our conversation today. If you've ever found yourself rebuilding, reimagining, or trying to make sense of the chapters life hands you, this book is going to speak to you. Keep an eye out for its release because Daniel doesn't just tell a story, he invites you into one. And I think a lot of people are going to find themselves in these pages. All right, we're back with Stream of Consciousness with Dan. We've got Daniel Gray with us. We've got some great content so far, and looking forward to the next half of our conversation. So let's talk about kind of where you want to see yourself in the future. I mean, you're out of prison, obviously. So, kind of what are your goals or kind of what are you looking forward to?
Yeah. So my first goal, obviously, is I do want to get this book published. I worked really hard on it, and I want to see it all the way through to fruition. But outside of that, like I said, I've been out of prison for about a year. I survived a really big identity collapse, and I faced some things that were very, very challenging to get through, and I got through them. And so my goal moving forward is to pursue peace in life and calm. And I love reflecting. I love sitting back and stepping back from the madness that I went through for years and talking about it in a calm manner. I love doing these kind of podcasts and interviews and stuff like that. I have some writing projects that I want to do, but I want to find a way to become useful, and to make the situation
Mhm.
that I went through useful to not just to myself but to other people. Because the worst thing that I could do is retreat back into a mindset of an aggrieved or angry mindset where I spend the rest of my life talking about how evil the federal government is or how wrong the things were that happened to me. I think accountability is the most important part of my life right now. When I say, maybe some things were fair, maybe some things weren't unfair, but I got myself into this situation.
Mhm.
So what does a man do? When everything's been taken away as far as like the courts and the probation and jail time, it just all disappears. It's just the absolute grace of God in my life. And so I can't look at that as anything more than a blessing or anything less than a blessing. Forgive me. So, looking at, I turned 46 in a couple of months. I'm not a young man anymore. So what does a man like me do? I don't plan to pursue a huge career or take on a lot of responsibilities that are going to overwhelm me. I don't have any pressure on me anymore. I want my life to be as simple and as peaceful and as ordinary and boring as possible.
Yeah. No, I can imagine that for sure. I want to ask kind of a difficult question.
Okay.
So obviously you will always be labeled as a felon.
Mhm.
How do you not let that identify you? Because obviously I've had this conversation with you. You are incredibly intelligent and have a super amount of
Thank you.
value to bring to community. So just basically how do you not let that identify you, or what advice would you give to other people in your situation to move on?
So the blessing I have is I was pardoned, so I don't have a criminal record anymore. So I have a full, complete, and unconditional pardon from the president. So if you run a background check on me, I could pass any
Oh, so it's
background check.
completely cleared.
Yeah,
And I'm
there's
not
nothing
super
there. I don't even
versed
have.
in the government, but
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I get that. But there is a dovetail. There's a second portion to that because I'm never going to not be a January 6th offender in a lot of people's
Mhm.
minds. And there's if you were to put Daniel Paul Gray into Google, you'll see about 50 articles about me, and they're just some of them are incredibly embarrassing. They talk about some of the things that I was saying. Like, oh my goodness, I can't believe what I was posting on social media before I got
Mhm.
arrested. And then some of the things deal with my history of drug and alcohol problems. Some of them are very, very harsh on me, and they accuse me of things that I fought really hard to prove I wasn't guilty of. And the media is never going to give me a fair shake. It is what it is, and people are always going to assume certain things about me. I accept that. There are certain people that if I tell them I'm a January 6th defendant, they'll get up and walk away just immediately. I'm one of the worst people that they could ever imagine. I have to own my part in that because if a magnitude of people feel a certain way about you, you can't just negate that and say, well, that's just how they feel. I mean, there's obviously a reason for that. And so, there's always going to be that part of this is always going to be a part of my identity. As much as I say I want to move on from it or I want to get past it, some people just aren't going to let me do that. And so
Mhm.
I'm always going to have to wrestle with this kind of identity. And I have situations, which is, it's funny because I work in a customer facing setting where I'm always in front of people. And I've had 10, 15 times where I've heard customers talk about January 6th and talk about how they feel about the defendants. And some people are very positive and some people are very negative. And there's me just sitting here like, that's me. That's literally me. And I have, yeah, I have a bit of anonymity because I'm not like well known for it. But I'm also tied to a historical event now that people are always going to have an opinion of. And so, what do I do? Do I get angry about it? Do I lash out at every single person who feels a certain type of way about me, or do I just accept that this is a part of my identity, and I have to process that? And so,
Mhm.
one of the worst things I think I could do is lean into it and say, yeah, I'm one of the January 6 guys, and and kind of lean into that bravado side of it because there are some people who, when they meet me, they're like, wow, you're one of those guys, and that's kind of really hard for me. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I like a little bit of anonymity when I'm in public. I don't like to, constantly be rehashing, what happened, and people will ask me some of the most bizarre questions, like, how did you organize this thing, or dude, I
Mhm.
can't sit here and give you a 20-minute, dissertation about what happened. And so,
No,
as far as that portion, there's always going to be an identity, a projection or an archetype or an identity attached to me.
that's a very profound way to look at it because, and I like again, I'm super excited to read your book because you just kind of walk the line perfectly of accepting, yes, I screwed up, but it doesn't define me. I still can, bring value and share my story and, do things like that. So I love that. And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about That's a hard word for me to say. I'm sorry. Recidivism?
Recidivism.
Recidivism. So
Yeah.
no, so my wife is going to school for criminal justice. So I was kind of helping
Okay.
her with her paper on recidivism. So kind of going back to the criminal justice system, but do you feel like your experience, helped prevent that and helped to keep you, on the straight and narrow, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just absolutely. I would never. The funny thing was when I got to prison, right? I meet all these guys who've been in prison for 10, 15, 20 years, and they thought I was the biggest idiot. They're like, why would you purposely put yourself in a situation to go to prison over a political situation? You didn't make any money doing this. There was no reason for you to do this. You put yourself into this. And so on the outside, when I was talking to a lot of the supporters, they were like, yeah, man, we support you. And I get to prison, I'm the biggest dunce in prison because I put myself in there intentionally. And you meet guys that have, a lot of them were sentenced under the 1994 the drug crime bill, and they have a three strikes you're out rule, and so they're doing life sentences now for selling
Mhm.
drugs. And that's why the book is called The Men from the Medium. It's about men who came over from the medium prison who were brought over because they worked their way down the point system and they've been in prison for 10, 15 plus years. And that was huge for me because you meet these men and they've lost everything, their wives, their kids, their grandchildren. They don't have no connection to their families anymore. All they have is each other. These guys are like 55 years old. They're just like muscles, and they just pull ups every day, like 50 pull ups. I can do like four, I'm like, how the hell are you guys
W-
doing this?
would you
They're in
face him
church
in the
every
octagon?
no, no. I mean, like so one of my best friends said all the best fighters in America are in prison. And when you go there, you kind of realize that a lot of these guys they train every day and they're in shape. And as a martial artist and somebody who has an athletic background, I'm like in awe of like what these guys are doing. Like there's one guy in there he does over 500 push-ups a day. He has a series that he does, and he goes and he finds a small spot on the yard and just knocks out his push-ups. And I did the math; he's done over 3 million push-ups since he's been in prison. And the funny thing about this guy is he changed my mindset a lot because we had a long talk. I talked to him about my situation and how I got involved and everything. And he was telling me his story. And I'm like, man, you're in here for selling drugs 20 years ago. It's insane to me. I do believe in justice. I do believe in punishment, but I also believe that a man should have right to redeem himself. And he says to me, he looks at me and he goes, yeah, man, the crime was really bad back then. And they had to do that. I'm like, there's no way that you're at peace with this. And he's like, yeah, I'm at peace with it. I do my routine. I go work in Job Corps. I go to church. I love the Lord. I work out every day. And this is how I live now. And, I think he's getting out soon. I think he's actually going to get out and save some money up. And, over the course of 20 years of incarceration and working for 80 cents an hour, he's got a couple $1,000s saved up. He's going
Mhm.
to have a second chance in life. But seeing that, why would I ever do this to myself again? Like I won't even like if I have a beer, I won't get into a car because if I get pulled over, it's going to be a news story. So
Mhm.
there are constraints on me that are higher than the average person. Because I don't want to jeopardize anything I'm doing now by making a foolish decision. Getting into a situation or just something stupid, and then I'm a news story again. Everything that I've done is undermined by one foolish decision. So I'm a 9 p.m. at home kind of guy. I'm a up early 6 a.m. kind of guy. I go to my church. I'm very guarded about who I'm around. And even the people that I allow give me information. I don't want to listen to conspiracy. I don't care if there's a situation somewhere that's troubling to people. It's not my concern anymore.
Well, that's really great to hear. I think I've done maybe does 500 push-ups a day. I think I've done 500 push-ups in my whole life. So,
Exactly.
oh
Yeah.
man. Well, that's great. So, I guess we'll kind of end it on this. If you were to go back, obviously you probably would make some different decisions, but that doesn't matter. So I just want, again, you just to give people advice to say, yes, I've screwed up, but it's not the end of the world, and to be hopeful and to do things the right way. Because I think you were just a 100% perfect example of that, of
Thank you.
acknowledging I've screwed up. I screw up every day. Maybe not
Mm-hmm.
to that. Um, to to that magnitude, but I screw up
Yeah.
every day. So just for the simpletons out there, like, you get in an argument with your wife, or you lash out at your pets or things like that. So like just just advice is how to cope with, situations that aren't ideal.
So, people, a lot of times people will talk about the concept of fairness in life. This isn't fair or that isn't fair. And the truth is, you're not guaranteed fairness in life at all. And you shouldn't even expect it. And consequences and actions are almost never equal. You can do something very small. I'm not saying what I did was small, but I'm saying as an example, you can do
Hmm.
something very small and the consequence can be enormous. And I had no way of knowing that I was going to end up, giving 4 years of my life under indictment, having to deal with all these things that I had to deal with, incarceration, media attention, identity collapse, based upon going to, one situation and getting myself more involved than I should have. And I wrestled with that for years because, for years when I was under indictment, I was like, this is not fair. This is not right. I'm being over prosecuted. I'm this, that, and the other. The prosecution is not fair. That is how the federal justice system works. It pushes you into plea agreements. It forces people to sign paperwork that is not true to what their actual actions are. And you can be a little bit guilty of something and end up facing some very, very serious things. And I see this right now. I see there's political situations that are happening where people are putting themselves in situations, where they're finding themselves in front of federal agents. And you have to understand it is a 20-year felony, to obstruct a federal agent, to get involved in these things. And so you have to make sure that you understand the consequences of your action. People are going to talk you into things. You'll go on social media and you'll receive praise for things that are ultimately going to be very harmful for you. And people will support you up until you go to prison. And then you're in there by yourself. And that's it. And you're the one that's going to be in court. It's not going to be the guy with 100,000 likes on his profile, on his post that told you to this is what we should take action on. He's not going to face any consequences. You're going to face consequences for this. And so that's the first thing is people just have to understand that things can escalate. And that's just the nature of the beast. It's not about fairness. It's not about what's right or what's wrong. It's about the system that we live in. And so I would tell anybody at all, if you want to exercise your First Amendment rights and you believe things are unjust on any side of the political spectrum, that is your right to do that. But know where the boundaries are because this thing will get out of control quickly and you will become an archetype and you will become an enemy to people and you will be used in the media and you'll be drugged through. And the people who support you, they're not going to actually support you. They're going to give you lip service and they're going to identify with you as a person, but they're not going to actually do that to help you. And so just know what you're getting yourself into, especially when you deal with the government, especially when you deal with the police. But the second portion of that is there's nothing in the world that you can't come back from. As long as you're still breathing, there's always hope and there's always a way to do it. What it takes a mindset change first off. You have to say, I want to do something different. What I'm doing is not working. I'm exhausted. I hate this place that I'm in. How do I change? That's the mindset shift. And then it takes an act of courage. It takes doing something different without knowing that there's going to be an expected result from this. And so when I sat down in prison and started writing, I had no idea where this was going to turn into. I had no idea what my future looked like. I had a criminal record. I was getting out to, having, charges on me, felonies on me for the rest of my life. And then it all just went away. And I'm not saying that's going to happen to people, but you never know when the grace of God is going to show up in your life. And so, when things really, really seem down, you just need one purposeful thing that you're doing to overcome it. Like, and for me, it was literally just sitting down and saying, I'm going to write these things down. And, looking back on the man that I was when I sat in prison and I started doing these things and the position that I'm in now, I'm not rich. I don't make any money doing this. Like, but I'm peaceful, man. Like life is comfortable,
Hmm.
and I can reflect on the things that I've been through. I can sit back and say, "Wow, that mountain actually did get moved, and I didn't have to do anything. All the stress, all the anxiety, all the pressure I put on myself, all the doom thinking, oh, this is never going to work. You know what? It did. On some level, it did, and I'm going to carry the weight of it on some level for the rest of my life. So there are going to be consequences for me for the rest of my life, but there are upsides, and so things change, and all that anxiety, all that fear, all that doubt. I mean, it's useless energy because you don't know what the future is going to bring. And all you have to do is align yourself. Say, okay, this is not helpful. This is not working for me anymore. I want this direction. And
Hmm.
you take an action step. I'm going to do something. And then at some point, you go from being a felon to an author. Like, how in
No,
the world did
absolutely. Hmm.
how did that happen to me? That's absurd.
No, absolutely. So before we sign off, would you mind if I said a quick prayer?
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah.
Okay. Um, said, I'm not a priest or anything, but I just do like to
Neither am I.
I
Don't
do
you
like
worry.
I do like to sign off with a little prayer. So, dear God, thank you for the conversation that we have shared with Daniel Gray. Thank you for the honesty, the courage, and the humanity in that space. Let whatever was true stay with us. Let whatever was heavy be held with care. And let whatever was unfinished find peace in your time. Give me and Daniel calm as we step away from our conversation and help me release what isn't ours to carry. Bless Daniel, his story, his healing, and his journey forward, and keep him surrounded by love and strength. And keep my heart soft, my mind clear, and my spirit grateful. Amen.
Thank you. Amen. This has been one of my favorite interviews. Thank you very much.
So, thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. Conversations like these aren't simple, they're not meant to be. They ask us to hold space for accountability and humanity at the same time. And I'm grateful you chose to sit with us through all of it. And again, a genuine thank you to Daniel for being willing to share his story with his just genuine honesty and openness and vulnerability. I'm sure it wasn't easy, and I'm just so grateful he trusted this space to do it with me today. So, as always, thank you for being part of this community, a community that believes people are more than their worst moment, and that growth is possible, even in the hardest places. I'll see you next time. Thanks for spending this time with us today. If this episode resonated with you, please feel free to share it with someone who might connect with Daniel's story. And if you want to support the show, leaving a rating or review will mean the world to me. Be on the lookout for Daniel's upcoming book, The Men from the Medium. And as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you next time.